I don't know if there is any audience participation, but if you want to go ahead and do
Is there any
that.
audience participation? Okay.
And then can we do our other one housekeeping thing, which is the vice chairperson?
Okay, so some of you may know that Josh Scove was appointed to the LTD board. And so he's not going to be serving as vice chair of this committee. And so it's unclear as to whether or not he will continue to be on the committee. I think there's a question as to, if he does continue on the committee as a board member, he won't have a vote. So there's a question as to whether or not we are open to adding another person to the committee. And if so, Kate was suggesting that we might want to choose someone from outside the district or suggest someone from outside the LTD district.
Yeah, so that would be the staff recommendation, just because looking at the project lists and we want to make sure that we do have a good representation from across the district, from across all of Lane County. Yeah. And so since we've lost a voting member, this would be an opportunity to add a new voting member that would be outside of the district. Ultimately, it's the LTD board who would have to appoint someone, but just wanted to know from the committee if there's any strong feelings against that.
So the question is the board open to that? And I'll just take a thumbs up, kind of.
Sure. When you say outside the district, you mean outside of Lane?
I'm sorry.
Outside of Lane Transit District, yes. So someone from Florence or someone from some of the other areas that are being represented where a lot of the projects are, so.
What's the rationale for having somebody that is not paying into the district or a member of the district having a vote as to how the dollars are being spent?
So it's similar. So LTD, you all represent the whole of the qualified entity of LTDs. So LTD serves as the qualified entity for the entire county. But so you all are
LTD district.
So some people here in this committee already, for instance, Josh Herring, who's not here right now, he represents partly outside of the district. But so you all are tasked with coming up with project prioritization across the whole county, not just for the Lane Transit District area. So it's just making sure that you have good representation from people outside of the Lane Transit District.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And so the other item is, I'm assuming that, well, Josh will not continue to serve as vice chair. I did take the liberty of asking Amy if she would be willing to serve. However, I'm sure she won't be incredibly disappointed if someone else would like to serve. Would anybody like to make a motion?
I will nominate Amy if she is willing to do that, to serve as vice chair.
I'll second
I hear a second from David Devaney. Let's go ahead and vote on Amy as vice chair of this committee. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Oh, I'm taking that was a late aye in favor of Amy.
Correct.
Thank you. Who's on the line?
Phil?
Thanks, Phil. Okay, Amy,
Yeah.
it's all yours. You are the official vice chair. And Phil, you are now recorded as here.
Thanks.
So, Kate Wilson, will you take it away?
Yes. So Mike asked me to just give a really high-level overview again to remind us for why we're here today and for what we're specifically focused on with these projects. So here's kind of the divide of how all of the STIF funding is divided out. You'll see there's 99%, I believe 1% goes to ODOT for administrative costs. But we're really focused today mostly on this formula fund, 90%, which is 90% of all STIF funds that are generated. And so you all have been given a list of projects that have come from 3 different providers, and they're all asking for some formula funds funding. So some of them are also projects that will be asking for other funding, either federal or potentially intercommunity, but what you're focused on right now is that this is the formula fund portion of this, which comes with specific requirements that I think we've talked about at length over our last few meetings. So they do have to, they have the requirements that are in your packet. They're on page 3 of your packet of what you're going to be using as your criteria. And so I think that this will be important to kind of have page 3 open today as the providers are talking to you, and I've asked each of them to kind of talk about how they address that. And so I think I want to talk really quickly, I think I'll actually get even greater into budgets a little bit, just to remind you all how much budget is available. So when ODOT originally came out with formula fund estimates, they came out with them last April, and they estimated that within the district, so again, it is important to think about this, and you're almost thinking about your formula funds as two different pots of money.
Do we
which
have
is-
this page? Do we
What's that?
have this page?
No, I don't think you have this specific one in here, so, this one is just this really high level to say, that ODOT came out with the formula fund that would say that about $12.7 million would be generated within the LTD boundary, and about $689,000 would be generated outside of the LTD boundary within Lane County. And then ODOT in late December just came out with new estimates to say that actually they think about 13.1 million will be generated within the LTD boundary, and about 713,000 will be done outside of the boundary. So we have slightly different numbers that we're working with, just to so everyone has a heads up and has a broad idea of how much funding we're working with. So again, and then this is all of the public transportation service providers will talk about their budgets, but just so you all have an idea too, so you can kind of be thinking really big picture for all of the projects that were submitted for in-district. Those projects all add up to be slightly less than now what ODOT has projected for us. And that is okay, because ODOT also asked providers to have their 130% list. And so LTD is actually the only provider that presented, say, if we have extra funds, this is how we would like to spend it. So they'll also talk a little bit about that 130% list. But and then out of district, we actually have requests for more money than ODOT anticipates that we will have come in. So they anticipate that we will have $713,000 come, yes, but we've had requests for $808,000. So that's really high level, just kind of so everyone can frame it to think about how much money that each of these projects have. I do also want to say that one of the things I think we have done very intentionally is that we asked the public transportation service providers to apply for these funds really early, partially so that you as a committee can engage in a conversation with them if needed. So that's partly starting today for them to explain their projects a little bit, and then partly you can see these numbers don't quite match up, but I don't want anyone to feel like these requests are hard and fast. It's either this or nothing at all. You can also go back and talk to the public transportation service providers. We can ask them questions. Can they adjust their budgets at all? If you think all of the projects, particularly for out of district, are worth funding, I think it's worth talking to the public transportation service providers to say, can you adjust your budgets to make that working together? A large part of STIF is about different public transportation service providers talking to each other and making it work together, and you all helping facilitate those conversations. So I'd like you all to keep that in mind as you think today about projects. And so then,
Did you have something, Phil?
Well, I just wanted to be reminded where the money comes from. Is this an employee payroll money, or is it something else?
this is employee payroll money, yes.
Okay, so the estimates that you have are based on somebody's projection of how the economy's doing and what the payroll is going to be.
Yes.
Thank you.
So yes, that's important to keep in mind, is that we could actually end up under budget too at some point. So, which I think LTD purposely added in some extra funds in case of that, so. Yeah, and so I think then also just, Mike asked me to clarify a couple other things. When you are seeing projects from all three providers, and they've each listed them as they're within just thinking about their own list. But you all can think about these lists as a complete list of projects rather than getting really focused on which provider gave each, if that makes sense. So that's important to keep in mind. Another thing is, I think lots of people have mentioned that this is complicated a little bit. So thanks for bearing with us as we're all learning this new process together across the whole state. And so I think one of our roles as staff is really to make sure that each of these projects is going to meet the ODOT requirements by the letter of the law. And then we're going to ask you all as committee members to say, okay, we know that these could all work for what ODOT wants. Now we have to think about what's important to our communities and to prioritize them appropriately. So that's really what we're asking you all to do. And so any of the projects that we have gotten any red flags about or anything that we think might not meet the letter of ODOT law, we'll mention those too. But
Thank you. So are we ready to dive in with presentations? Is Cottage Grove up first? Was that how? Or no, you want,
Lane Transit
Lane
District
Transit
in
District,
district
yeah.
is gonna go, and actually they just gave me some extra handouts to give everyone, which is similar to some of the handouts that you have now. but specifically for their projects.
Couldn't get the eye.
I think that's what it's. The legislature, the state government is really good at making up stupid,
Yeah.
crazy ways of describing things. They didn't want to call it employee payroll tax money.
so Tom, if you're ready, why don't you go ahead and start?
Okay, good. Well, what's going around, the handout that's going around is the set of materials that we provided to the board. So you might recognize this material. And we thought it was helpful because it gives a really good comprehensive look at the project. So you have a sense of what we're looking for from a funding standpoint in each of the 3 years, and gives you the totals, and this is by project. But we also have the description of the task, a little more description than we were able to fit into the actual application. That's one of the feedbacks we want to provide to ODOT. There's not a lot of space there to describe what it is we're doing. So you have that task description, and then one of the key requirements of the application was to identify the plan basis. What plans that the entity, the public transit, in this case LTD, what plans do we have that are driving these projects? And so, and then in addition, the last page gives you another key aspect of the process is identifying what the outcomes are going to be. And so for each project, you can see things like revenue miles and hours, the estimated number of rides, those kinds of outcome measures were requested of us as we filled out the application. And so you can kind of see that in a summary fashion. So let me start at the top.
Phil has a question.
I'm sorry to
Yeah,
keep asking these dumb questions, but there's some words in here I don't have any idea what they mean.
Okay.
Could you tell us what revenue miles, revenue hours mean? I think I can figure out what rides means.
Sure.
But what are those first two ideas?
So these were the outcome measures that were requested in the application, and it's basically this investment. And let me preface what I'm going to say by saying each, depending on the project category, you would have different outcome measures, which is why you have some of these measures for some projects and not for others.
Well, I'm sure everybody knows, here except me, knows about these two terms, but I don't know what they mean.
Sure. So revenue miles is the number of miles that would be, in essence, paid for through the grant.
Gotcha.
And that's how many additional miles we'd be operating as a result of the grant. The revenue hours, same thing, the number of hours that we're operating.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Sure.
Chair.
So again, to start at the top, it may even be helpful for you to separate these two tables out, because then you can kind of follow along as we go through. The first project we had, and I should define the way the project applications were set up. We could identify a number of projects, and within each project, we could identify specific tasks. So for example, the first project we have is increased bus service. We have 2 tasks under that project, one related to fixed route and paratransit operating, and the other related to youth program capacity. So let me talk first about the fixed route paratransit operating. So what we're looking at here is basically additional operating money that can be used to increase our services. And some of you might know we're going through what's called a comprehensive operations analysis. We've branded that process Transit Tomorrow. And that's going to help us identify where and how we're going to add this service. But it's basically represents an increase in service for the district. The youth program capacity is.
Can I just ask what paratransit, just what is paratransit?
Oh, paratransit is the ride source service
Okay,
that we
all right,
operate.
thank you.
Anytime you expand service, you need to look at also increasing the amount of ride source that can be made available.
I assumed that, but I thought
Yeah.
maybe I shouldn't assume.
Yeah, no, good question. The youth program capacity is that service that we've estimated is going to be necessary to address the demand that we expect to see from the student transit pass, which is another, is part of another project down here, which I'll talk about next. And that's based on our experience. You might, those of you who've lived in the district know that we had a student transit pass for a number of years. And when we were operating that, that's where we got a sense of how much service needed to be provided in order to address that demand. And a lot of that, just an additional factoid here, is that a lot of that service comes at the bell times, which happens to equate with our peak service. So it's important to make sure that we have that capacity to address the needs that are addressed there. So those are the 2 projects. As I understand it, I have a limited amount of time. I'm not going to get into detail like this in every project, but I just point out that, so you look at the task descriptions, they're relatively self-explanatory. The plan basis is literally references to the various plans that support this request for funding. And
So has a question?
The youth program capacity one, is that free or subsidized bus passes?
So if you look at the next project, that project is the youth fare subsidies.
Okay.
Coming
Oh,
from.
sorry. So,
Yeah.
yes, that was what
Okay.
I meant to ask about, I guess.
This is a good clarification, because the youth program capacity is actually the service we need to add
Got
to
it.
support that.
Yes, okay.
Okay. So, but just to talk about the plan basis a little bit, so this can tell you, you can look at this to see where we've got policy and plan support for this application. That's what that means. Okay? So moving forward, youth and low-income fare programs. So we're requesting funding to support a youth program and a low-income fare program. And they're a little bit different in how they're structured. The youth program would be something that would provide a youth pass during the school year. And in the summer, the region would continue with its one pass program. And that's, you can see the estimated cost there for providing that fare subsidy. The low-income program, I don't know if you're familiar with our program, but we have a number of social service providers that we provide a reduced cost fare instruments for them. They can purchase those, again, at a reduced cost. This program, or this funding would allow us to increase the subsidy to social service agencies. So we buy down even further the cost of those fares. And so you can see kind of what we're looking at there on an annual basis. And then you can look at the outcomes to see what we estimate in terms of the number of discounted income, low-income fares is $625,000, or 625,000 fares. So moving on.
Before you move on.
Yes.
When I was looking over the budget for Project 2, what wasn't included in the total project cost was the federal funding that would be combined with that program.
The federal funding for the low-income fares?
Student fares.
So what federal program, funding?
I don't know, but in your budget, you're showing $100,000. So I just wondered if that was,
There's no federal funding for this
no,
project.
that first,
That's,
That may be a typo in my.
okay,
That's
great,
right, yeah,
because now it
fix
makes
that.
sense. Okay.
Sarah, did you have another question?
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure. Is this the time to ask specific questions about these projects or not?
I think if we're gonna, we wanna make sure that you understand, I think, how they fit into the criteria. I think if
Okay.
we're gonna get into like implementation, let's hold off on that and to make sure that all the providers have a lot of time to, but I think if you're thinking about
Understanding.
just understanding what it
clarification.
is, then this is a good time to ask the providers.
Yeah, they did provide that. So the next project is rolling stock and vehicles. And again, that's relatively self-explanatory. The application requires us to identify the types of vehicles, et cetera, that we would be purchasing with this funding. This is one of those instances where this grant funding is actually leveraging federal funds at a significant ratio. So, this is where that money is how that money is being used to leverage the purchase of additional vehicles. And if you're familiar with transit operations, the buses are a critical asset for us to manage, and so we go through periods where we're buying a lot of buses, and that's where we're at right now.
Will you provide us with the federal criteria later?
Yeah, we
Thank you.
can provide that.
Are the paratransit vehicles, any of them electric or hybrid?
Yeah, you can see there, we've got money going in for 40-foot all-electric buses and 40 and 60-foot hybrid electric diesel buses.
But not the paratransit
Were you asking whether the paratransit
Yeah.
was electric?
specifically?
Are those the vans?
The vans, yeah.
There you are. No.
No.
Okay, so the fourth project that we have is called Mobility as a Service. You might have heard that terminology being thrown around. That's kind of the terminology being used in the industry to describe additional mobility offers, I guess you'd say. And so mobility as a service, operating in strategic partnerships is the first task there. That's going to, you can see there's funding in this current fiscal year. And that's to help fund the cost of the mobility on demand pilot that we're doing in Cottage Grove. And we've got folks here that can describe more about how that's going to work. In addition to that, we've got the Mobility on Demand administration and marketing that goes into providing that kind of service. And so that's broken out as a task. And then as part of this funding, we're getting, we're diving into the pilot, but we also want to take a step back and do some broader planning around mobility management as a topic. So we've identified some funding to help develop a plan for that. So that's the fourth project. The fifth is looking at sustainable service reserves. So one of the features of the legislation was that we can identify funding to put in reserve to help address potential variations in the payroll tax that's coming into the STIF program that we can use to cover or backfill if there's a downturn in the economy, for example, to cover some of the some of the service-related aspects of our STIF plan. The next project is the STIF administration costs, and this includes tasks related to LCOG's cost of administrating the overall program, and then LTD's, it's more of an internal, how we're managing the money as it flows in. So that gives you a total of our 100% list. Again, this 100% list was based on the initial forecast that ODOT had provided, not the updated ones that Kate went over. We did have, for the in-district, we had a 130% list that we created in case there's additional funding, and I'll just briefly touch on those. We have some additional fixed route operating, so additional increase services, and then some additional fleet replacement that bring that's the 130% list that bring the total request for 130% to that $16.5 million. So out of district, do you want to go through that then? Is that how we're doing it?
No, we're gonna actually go ahead and we're gonna stay in district.
Okay.
And so we'll go Cottage Grove is gonna talk next, and then we'll have LCOG go since they have one project that's both asking for in and out. Yeah, I think if you have questions for Tom specifically now, you can ask them now.
So this mobility as a service operating strategic partnership, so it looks like you've got a 13-month pilot. I understand that that's already decided where that's going to be.
Right.
And then, so you're showing funding for three years. And so the first one is going to be a 13-month pilot, and then you're going to decide where to maybe move this to other areas.
Right, we've looked at a high level, we've looked at other potential areas, more within the metro area that we'd be looking at. And some of that's going to be informed by the outcome of the pilot and further analysis.
Okay, so who will decide on those further actions in the future? Because this body would say, okay to the funding, right?
Right.
And then would it be at the strategic planning committee, would it be at the LTD board?
Well,
How would you take the pilot and move it on?
well, so there'll obviously be a technical evaluation of how things went, and really the purpose of the pilot is to learn what we might be able to do better. I wouldn't say what we're doing in Cottage Grove is the definitive thing, so we're going to look at based on lessons learned there, we're going to look at other areas, like I said, in the metro area to test the pilot. I mean, the decision, I guess the board would be involved in budget decisions related to that.
Any other questions for Tom? Oh, go ahead, sir.
I have a few questions. Something I was reading before, it said that Project One, there wouldn't be STIP funds expended in future years, STIP years beyond these three. And I didn't understand how that would be the case for Project One. It seems like wouldn't you want to keep asking for money for?
So you may have been reading the description of the funds. That's not something we wrote. But the anticipation is that in this first round, we're establishing new improved services.
Yeah.
As in future years, continuing these things will be eligible expense.
For STIP funds?
Right.
Okay. And then for the youth program, you split out marketing for the mobility, is it Mobility on Demand?
Yeah.
It seems like that could be a good idea for the youth program as well, to split out marketing, or at least, I don't know how much you have designated for marketing and education, but I just think that it would be a worthwhile investment to spend.
Well, and to be sure, we're going to be expending resources for that. This represents basically the financial subsidy of the fairs. That'll go into our operating costs, some of which will go for marketing that program. Does that make sense?
I don't know, it makes sense, but I don't know how much you have set aside, how much you're thinking will be set aside for marketing and education. It just seems to me that this is a special market marketing to middle schoolers and high schoolers is gonna be different than marketing to the general population. And
Absolutely.
it's a really great
And
opportunity.
that's the experience we had when we operated the fair in the
Good,
past.
okay.
So we're going to use that, I think, that understanding of how to market to this group to move forward.
Okay, Safe Routes to School would surely be interested in partnering on
absolutely.
getting the word out. If this program the youth program is really successful, then would there be a need to have a higher amount of funding in the Project 2 youth program capacity? And is there flexibility to do that?
Well, in fact, you'll note that's exactly our thinking. So as we went back and looked at how things worked when we first implemented this, we found that in the first year we needed X number of buses, which is where that $400,000 estimate came from, and that in the second year, having had a year to use it, there were more uses being put to it. So we increased the funding for that purpose.
Great. Okay.
Other questions for Tom? Sherry?
So I know that at one time we talked about the electronic pass, the electronic fair, and just to be able to use that, being maybe a part of the youth tag or something, I don't know. So is that kind of built in, or is that something that would be aside from this funding?
So LTD's in the process right now. We have a request for proposals out right now for an electronic fare collection system. That's due back at the end of this week. We expect to have our fare collection system in place by August 1st.
Okay, so that then would be outside of this program?
Yeah.
Okay, great, wow, thank you.
So Phil Farrington, do you have any questions, anything you want to throw in?
None at this time, thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you, Tom. So Cottage Grove, we know that you're not Eugene, Oregon.
Not the last time I checked.
So you are,
Amanda Ferguson, I'm the
Amanda.
city planner for the city of Cottage Grove.
thank you.
And she's also the advisor on the board of South Lane Wheels. And so what we're bringing to you is what we learned in a compliance review is South Lane Wheels, which has been in existence for over 35 years, is a private nonprofit public transit service. We've never had a transportation demand plan, and that is apparently a requirement. And what we're proposing is fulfilling that requirement, and now is an ideal time, because as that provider of a pilot project, we're at a crossroad of trying to identify what's the best way to serve South Lane County. And even though the pilot is predominantly going to be within the city limits of Cottage Grove, South Lane Wheels has been labeled as senior wheels as an identifier, and it just can't seem to get beyond that. And so even though I can say public transit till I'm blue in the face, people don't get it. And so we're excited to be a part of this Mobility on Demand pilot to break that barrier. But we don't want to lose the opportunity to explore, is this a good fit for our community? Are there other ways that, or a mixture of services that could better serve and use resources in South Lane County? And so this transit demand plan, we proposed $40,000 based upon ignorance. I did not, I was checking in with another rural community that had recently done a demand plan, and they had the bill of $37,000. So I thought, we could do that too, not realizing we're further south than this community of Lebanon, and we really don't know how much it'll cost, except we've been advised in speaking with LCOG that $75,000 to $100,000 would be a better range in order to do the full scope of public outreach, surveys and within the time frame that would do it justice. So my apologies for proposing a low budget. And I'm not sure where we're gonna get the extra funds, but I'm hoping the committee is willing to exercise a higher amount. And if we could have a couple weeks to explore in talking to some consulting firms and resources that do this type of consulting work to actually get some quotes so that we have a better amount to ask on this project.
So let's just address that for a second. We're shooting for February 5th, and I think we even got one more meeting if we needed it, with the potential of a January 22nd meeting in the interim. Is that enough time, and is there sufficient funding, do you think, Kate, for them to assume an $80,000 price tag on this project?
I think if you all are interested in asking them to do that, there isn't enough time to do that. And I mean, I think that this is one thing that the rules call out, is that if a community doesn't have a plan, that this first round of STIF funding can be used for a plan. And I think because ODOT has come in with the higher costs right now, that you actually do have less project applications right now for in-district, and Cottage Grove is in-district, so I think that is, if they want to come back, if they want to do a little bit more research and come back to you all, there is time.
Is that
So
gonna-
we'll work with whatever timeline you want to give us. So if a week is
Well,
what
no,
makes sense.
it seems to me like, we haven't decided whether we're gonna have a January 22nd meeting. But I don't know why we would need to know it much before February 5th. I can't think of a reason. LTD, can you guys think of any reason why that? Okay, so why don't you assume that at the February 5th, and of course, if you can get something to Kate ahead of time.
Sure.
So that she can kind of review it and
Yeah,
see if it looks like it's feasible.
okay.
Sherry?
So my understanding then is you're basically looking at the plan being put together next year, so you wouldn't be able to implement any kind of additional services. You just basically are coming in now for the plan.
Exactly. And so we are going to use the plan to, once it's in place, and that may not get accomplished until 2020, but it may take a year, but we're going to ask for the funding as soon as we can. And we could start the project and then let the funding reimburse us.
For the plan?
Yeah.
Okay, so at the point that the plan were put together, would that involve some dreaming about what kind of transportation needs you might be able to meet with some additional funding?
That would be the goal, is
Okay.
it would give us a guide.
Okay,
Because if we find out, give us more mobility on demand type service and we will utilize it if it's subsidized or whatever that plan presents, that gives us something to actually work with. And it also gives us, similar to what you just saw, is then we can make some asks that are in relationship to some real data.
and so my question, I guess, too, would be, what kind of funding, how have you funded these South Lane wheels in the past, up to the present now?
Our service is actually funded by federal and state funds.
Okay.
And so we've got grants that provide our operations, but they don't provide funding for planning.
Okay.
And so this is just focused to pay for a plan.
So you already then have, is it possible for us to see in this process, or is it necessary for us to see kind of what kind of funds you have now, or what you've been doing? I guess I'm kind of interested in knowing what you've been doing. That would be helpful to me, even to look at.
Sure.
So is there something you could put together that would provide that? Just, I don't know, is that asking,
I could
is
send
that
you.
not okay for me to ask for?
It sounds like it's not a problem to ask, and it's not a problem to provide, so.
And if I do an annual report, it's a pretty two-page type presentation of just a synopsis of
So
our
kind of how many
ridership
people
and
you
our-
serve and,
yeah.
and how much money
Yeah.
and that sort of thing. Okay,
Yeah.
that would, for me, that would be really helpful as I'm identifying,
Okay.
you know, creating a plan. Thank you.
Could I simply add that that would apply generally to projects?
Yes.
There's a bunch of these that I know so little about, and it's not just a reference to you, it's all of them, that I know so little about, that figuring out the context and why this particular project rather than something else would be really helpful.
Right,
So I'd second
yeah.
Sherry's
And
thought.
the main point is, this is a criteria that we're required if we want to continue to receive federal funds. And so it's what keeps us in the game,
The light goes on.
so to
Yes.
speak.
We
And
know
so
federal
that's
requirements.
the primary goal.
Yeah.
But the secondary goal is, we've got to a point where really we need to figure out how to be a better service provider. The same old is not really, in my mind, productive. And so I think, given some more information, we could do a better job, I believe.
Did you say this is a nonprofit?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, did you have anything else that you wanted to present, Ruth, or is that?
No, I was going to say that from the city's point of view, honestly, it's the better provision of service that is the motivating factor for us. And the tying it into the mobility on demand project, that we're going to have all of that data that's going to be feeding this project, which is the perfect timing to do this kind of planning study.
Okay.
So we won't have to double dip on the creation of a lot of this data.
Thank you.
Amy?
Question, would it be a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan? What's the?
Oh, 20.
10 to 20.
10 to 20?
Yeah.
Anybody else? Phil Farrington?
Mike?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. Has the city explored, or South Lane Wheels explored, other potential sources of funding that may be available, for planning studies, as opposed to the other requests that we're getting, which are more hard dollars for direct service improvements? So not to diminish the need or the request that you're making, but have you looked at any other sources of funding possibly?
We actually made this request for funding under this area in part in conversation with DLCD, really recommending that DLCD and ODOT really recommending this as a potential source because of the other avenues are so much harder right now. But
Okay.
if we do not get this funding, we will still pursue looking for another funding source because we have to have this plan in order to continue providing this service.
Yeah. Okay. Great. That's a great response. Thank you very much.
Other questions? Okay, are we ready to move on to Florence? Thank you. Cottage Grove.
My name is Kelly Clark. I'm a transportation planner with the Lane Council of Governments, and I have two applications in today. Both will provide inter-community connections within and beyond Lane County. Both will contribute to the statewide transit network, and both will aid in the accessibility and mobility within Lane County and beyond for our residents and for low-income households. So the first project is the Eugene to Florence Public Transportation Project, and this is a route between the communities of Eugene, Springfield, and Florence. We don't currently have a public transportation option between these two communities, and this would establish a 2-year pilot project. LCOG conducted a 2-year feasibility study for this project, and through that conducted a public survey, which had over 1,500 respondents, a lot of support, and a lot of people citing that they would use this service for recreation and entertainment, for medical services, for commute, personal needs, medical trips, and student travel, which I think is mostly focused on Lane Community College types of travel, not the K-12 travel. So the project has a lot of support that we found through this feasibility study on both ends of the corridor, and We're creating some partnerships with the Coos County Area Transit, the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, Siuslaw, and the Florence Area Chamber of Commerce, the City of Florence, Travel Lane County, Trillium, Peace Health. So kind of a gamut of stakeholders that are interested in being partners with this project. The majority of this route is outside of LTD's service district, and so the majority of the funds that we're asking for are the outside of district funds. And then the second project is the Yachats to Florence connector, and this route is currently operating as a pilot project by LTD with River City Taxi as a contractor, and it's funded through a grant from ODOT, which will end June 30th of this year. And so LCOG is proposing to take this route on and manage it, again, as a contract manager, similar to what LTD is currently doing, and hopefully have a seamless transition from manager to manager, and so we can keep this route running. Before this route was established, it was the only gap in the service along the West Coast Highway, and so we want to make sure that gap stays filled. Of course, all of that route is outside of the LTD service district, and so we're applying for out-of-district funds for that route as well. And we'll continue partnering with the same stakeholders that LTD has already established, most particularly the Lane County Transit District, City of Florence, and the Confederated Tribes in that area as well. I'm happy to answer any questions about these projects.
Questions? Sherry?
Well, I'm a little bit confused. So I'm looking at your project requests and the monies that you're requesting. So am I correct in understanding it's in the first project, Project 11, it's $80,000 from
Yes,
STIF?
and thank you for asking. I should have mentioned that the funds that we're asking here will use towards match for the project overall implementation. And so we'll be applying also for the statewide discretionary funds, which is a bigger pot of money for
Right.
these intercommunity funds.
Okay,
Yep.
but the 80,000 is what
Is
you're
for-
requesting from STIF overall.
That's
Two
right.
different years, 20 and 21.
That's right. And so,
And-
yep,
And so this is just purely for service?
this is for service.
Okay, and so then on the next one, the same thing, we're looking at a total of 55,000. The 5,000 for this year, right?
It's just to, again, hopefully maintain that service and use some of that money in this fiscal year for transition.
Okay, and so I'm assuming that the collaboration with the Confederated Tribes is because they also provide now some kind of service between Eugene and?
They're a public service provider. They have their
They are a
casino.
public service provider?
They are. Their casino operates a shuttle to the casino.
Okay.
The biggest reason for collaborating with them is they have been a really strong partner in our project.
They have a what?
They've been a really strong partner in our project. They potentially have a bus that we might be able to use. And then their service, their boundary for their tribes extends to Reedsport and then Coos Bay, and then into Florence. And they're interested in getting their tribal members access to all of these communities within that area. And so they're wanting to be a part of the project to make sure that it has a strong, that we're providing that access.
So right now, the transportation they're providing is just east-west, west-east, or is it in town as well?
They're not providing any service right now. They'll provide, it's not a public transportation service that they're providing right now. They can provide trips for their tribal members into Coos Bay for services, but it's not a public transportation forum.
It's not a nonprofit either, it's, okay.
It's specifically for their tribal members to gain access to the services within Coos Bay.
Okay, in Coos Bay. So then, so you mentioned going north to Yachats, but is there also a southern portion of that?
Yeah, and that's another good question. The southern portion from Florence to Coos Bay, the Coos County Area Transit will be applying for a project for
Okay,
that
for
service.
also for STIF funds,
Yes,
okay.
through STIF
Makes
funds, the
sense.
interdiscretionary pot of money that's
Wow,
open
this gets
February
very
1st.
confusing, doesn't
So,
it?
I apologize for the confusion, but it is an effort on our part to really collaborate with those partners and create seamless transitions, but understanding that they do cross boundaries and there's a lot of collaboration that needs to happen.
So Can I just, I mean, this is not a lot of money, and so what kind of service are we talking about? I mean, once daily or?
For the Eugene to Florence, what we're proposing is 7 days a week, 2 round trips a day and potentially 3 a day. And that's, again, this is a pilot project, and so what we'll do is start with the funding that we have available in the contract. Whoever, LCOG will go off, issue an RFP, we'll get a private operator to run the service, and then work with that operator to see what the funds will provide for us. But what we're basing it on is, again, 7 days, 2 days a week, and potentially 3. And then the Yachats to Florence connector is currently running Monday through Friday, 4 round trips a day. And that currently, I believe, is going up to 5 trips a day within a short time frame. And so we'll hope to continue that service.
So,
If you have sorry,
but, I mean,
Sherry.
just to continue, I mean, the amount of funding you're asking from us is a fairly small amount, but it's being combined with some local funds, also, not
Right,
federal,
some-
state.
And the local funds that will be used toward this funding that we're asking for today will be used as match for the discretionary funds from the STIF pot of money at the state level.
So
Okay.
remember, there's another bucket, and you can use some of this money to match.
Match from those funds, okay, so I see that the 400,000 then from the Yachats to Florence to Yachats is a larger total match. But we're
It's
talking about a
larger
little
than-
less service, it's a little less distance too, isn't it?
It's less distance, that's right. So it's about a half the distance, and so what we're finding is about a half the cost to operate. Yep.
I guess
So go
again,
ahead,
this
Ruth,
is,
and then Phil.
well, I just to kind of finish up,
Yeah.
this is another one of those that I would like to see some, I think, background. Because, you know, what has been happening and how has it been happening?
Sure,
Would
absolutely.
be really helpful.
Yeah, we gotta get out to the coast.
Yeah.
You could use this service to get out there.
Ruth and then Phil.
Well, the question I wanted is it just point to point between Eugene and Florence, or are there gonna be stops along the way?
Right now, what the pilot is proposing is a point-to-point Eugene to Florence.
Okay.
Downtown Eugene to the grocery outlet in Florence, where some other transit connections are made. Again, through the pilot, we might find that we want an interim stop in Mapleton might be a good option, and so we'll find that as we operate this pilot.
And because it may evolve, you're not putting in any infrastructure, there's not gonna be shelters and those
Right.
type of elements that are gonna be part of this
Just the
particular
operation.
start. Okay.
Phil.
I think that my question's been answered. I'm really interested in the context, and maybe I should ask one question. Is this money designed to be, the STIF money designed to be a match for some other funds? Is that the idea?
This formula fund piece
Yeah.
of the STIF funding can be used as match for the discretionary funding.
It's eligible.
Yep.
Okay, but is that the idea when you're going after state funding? You want to be able to say to the state, hey, these local people have already approved some money from the STIF pot to
That'd be ideal.
do this? Is that part of the thought?
That is the thought, yes.
Okay.
And I think, again, with the STIF funding, these projects are really in line with the criteria of providing intercommunity service, providing service for low-income households, and providing access and mobility.
But part of it would be that this is the imprimatur from the locals, that the state ought to put their money into it. In
Yes.
effect, because the
Yes.
amount's pretty small.
Right.
Yeah, thank you.
David.
So I just want to make sure that the state and the local funding has not been secured at this point.
That's right, it hasn't.
Hopefully you're going to use the STIF money to leverage.
Yes, so I think that was part of the strategy here, is to leverage the funds that we can be granted from this pot of money towards the larger amount at the state level, which is a competitive funding round as well.
Sherry.
So am I to assume then that you already have a transit development plan?
We have a feasibility study for the Eugene to Florence project. These projects derive from local TSPs and the Confederated Tribes transit plans.
Okay, So it
The
meets
Florence
it meets-
Transportation System
It meets
Plan.
the criteria that you have
Yes.
to have a transit development plan.
Right.
So it sounds like you're including several different organizations, however, in doing this. Is there gonna be a wraparound organization that's going to handle the funds?
And that's
see
the
what I'm
role
saying?
that LCOG will hold.
LCOG will do that, be that,
Yep.
the wraparound organization?
Yep, so LCOG is defined as a public transportation service provider, and so we're eligible to manage these funds and to operate the service. Obviously, we don't have buses, and so that's why we would go out, issue an RFP to go out and have a private operator operate the service.
I see.
That's not dissimilar to how a lot of the other intercommunity routes are managed throughout the state, and so it's a model that we can emulate based on other examples.
So it's a contracting, you're just basically contracting
Yep,
for service?
contract management.
Okay.
Right. But again, I think that's why it's so important for us to continue collaborating with these partners that we've established, because there's a lot of connections that need to be made, and
Right.
we want to make sure that these routes are seamless and they're providing the connections that need to be made.
David has a question.
So if you're trying to establish a permanent route from Florence to Eugene,
Yes.
does that allow LTD then to tax the businesses in Florence and providing a service to them? I mean, is that something that long-term, why would the businesses in Florence not be taxed if we're providing
LTDs
an LTD service to them?
LTD service boundary extends just to the edge of Veneta, and that's part of the challenge with this project, is that there's not a service, a specific transit district that extends beyond Veneta, and so that was part of our feasibility study, is who is eligible to manage this route. And fortunately, LCOG is a public transportation service provider, and so is eligible too. But as far as LTD taxing just areas or businesses outside of their district, that's not, as far as I know, in their purview. I think it would be up to Florence, the city, to say we're interested in becoming part of the district and approach LTD, but
Well, if I could, the STIF money comes from the payroll tax, statewide payroll tax.
Right.
And therefore, people in Florence and Yachats pay that.
that's true.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep, they don't pay into the LTD.
They don't pay into
Right.
LTD's operations,
Right.
but they do pay into the
They
STIF
pay in the
fund.
STIF, right, and so that's, of course, all of Oregon does, and so we're all eligible, but.
Sherry, did you have something else?
No, that was my question. That was my comment.
So I have a question. I thought I heard you mention the LCC site at Florence, and I wasn't sure what the context of that was.
Through the feasibility study, I had conversations with LCC, some of their staff, and just because we're trying to understand, who is a stakeholder, who's interested in this type of route, and how would it be marketed, how would people use it, where would they be trying to get to? And the LCC was very interested in getting students back and forth between Eugene and Florence, particularly with the new initiative from Kate Brown's office for, I think it's free and reduced community college access for students in Oregon, getting students from Florence into Eugene for the classes that they need to get to. And so had a lot of interest in supporting the project through kind of being at the table as it moves forward.
So when you answered, I think it was Ruth's question, you talked about point to point from Eugene to Florence. Would that Eugene bus go to the LCC Florence campus?
Right now, it's proposed to go into the downtown transit station, and then people could take the connections that they need to get to their
My
next
recollection
destination.
of the Florence campuses is pretty isolated, is it?
Oh, sorry, into Florence.
Yeah,
It would go into the grocery outlet location where there's a transit kind of hub, and have to make a connection to get to the campus.
Okay. And you
And I
have
think-
worked with
sorry.
LCC folks on this? at
Right,
LCC Center?
we would continue to work with them. One option is once we establish the arrival time, if it doesn't, I think LCC would be interested in working with, class times that would serve those students who are coming in and understanding the classes that they need to get to and when they need to get to them, and work around that for course times.
Thanks. Other questions? Bill Farrington?
Mike?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I've got a couple. And I'm sorry if y'all went over this at the beginning in talking with Tom, but in the paperwork that we've got, and it lists the number for these two projects, the number of rides. Are these annual numbers or projected number of rides?
Those are the projected number of rides over the 2-year pilot project.
So those are by for 2 years then. Okay.
Those are for they're for the entirety of the STIF funding cycle.
And what kind of, and again, apologies if you've gone over this, but the type of vehicle that would be employed for each of these two projects?
So what we've seen from other intercommunity routes and similar services is that they use a cutaway, so a smaller bus, and we would explore using that. But that is kind of a piece of the puzzle to figure out as we work with a contractor to do this route. I think I mentioned that the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Sayusla have a bus we might be able to use, and it's a cutaway, so if the contractor that we have can manage that bus, then that would be an option.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I guess that begs the question of whether or not any of these rolling stock vehicles are being considered as a leasable vehicle to that contractor.
That we haven't had that conversation. It might be an option as we move forward. Right now, the Florence to Yachats route, the current pilot that's under operation now, ODOT and LTD purchased a bus for that route, and so we would hope to continue using that bus, which is a cutaway bus. I think it holds 22 people. I don't know, 22 people.
Okay, it sounds like we're about finished with those questions. So we have about 20 minutes before we need to adjourn.
Because we still need to do out-of-district LTD.
Oh, I'm sorry, there's another, okay. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
one more
Well, then
presentation.
we're gonna do some recommendations right now.
Yeah.
Cosette? Thank you.
Got my hopes up. Hi, everyone. I'm Cosette Reese, and I'm the Director of Customer and Specialized Services. And I'm going to talk to you today about some applications that we have for out of area. All of these applications are expanding or enhancing service. So we already have existing services, and it's either infrastructure or expanded service to help support these services. So the first one is Project 7, and this is the Roadie Express rolling stock. So the vehicle that we're currently operating, the Roadie Express, it's a circulator trip that operates within the city of Florence. It operates hourly from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. It's funded with 5310 funds, and it also receives some STF funds, and it also receives support from the city of Florence. So they make a contribution toward the match. The vehicle that we're currently using is a 2009 vehicle. It's got a lot of miles and it's long in the teeth. We've replaced the engine and we've replaced the transmission, so it's in relatively good condition, but it's still having some reliability issues. And we're contracting with River Cities Taxi, which is a taxi provider there in Cottage Grove, to operate this service. And they've been really generous when the vehicle has broken down. They've been really generous in backfilling with one of their taxi vehicles, but that takes their personal taxi vehicle or their own business vehicle out of service and uses it for this service. So what we're suggesting that we do is that we purchase a new vehicle and that become the primary vehicle for the Roadie Express service, and that we move this vehicle into a backup position. So the funds to purchase this vehicle, and the vehicle would be to basically create a primary and a backup vehicle. As well as, if I can move into Project 8. Again, I described a little bit about the service of the Roadie Express, and we're looking to expand the service. So again, currently it's 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., and it operates hourly. And what we're finding and what we're hearing from folks in Florence is that that really doesn't work for them to be usable for commuter service or to go to classes or really for anything outside of kind of discretionary trips. So our proposal is to expand the service to operate from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. So we're adding 3 hours. And we're hoping that that makes it more attractive for people who are commuting, as well as the once an hour trip. What we're finding again is that it's not frequent enough to be usable for folks who want to use it for commutes. So we're also suggesting that we go from once an hour to every 30 minutes between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. We currently have about 7,000 rides per year. And we feel that this is a really good opportunity. So the funds that we've been using, the 5310 funds that we've been using, have been flat. And we haven't seen any growth in those funds. And in fact, we've been doing basically the same level of service. And as inflation creeps up on us, we're actually doing the same level of service with more expensive with the same amount of dollars. So this gives us a great opportunity to better serve our rural community that has a lot of folks who are seniors and people who want to get out and go to school and go to work and do other things. And it also gives us an opportunity, I think, to link up with the other services that LCOG is talking about from Yachats and from Eugene. And so I think it kind of completes that transportation network. So.
Questions? Comments, Phil?
Thank you. How big is the vehicle?
So the vehicle that we're currently operating with is a cutaway vehicle, and it, a cutaway vehicle.
I have no idea what that means.
So a cutaway vehicle, just to make it visual for you, it's just the same as our paratransit vehicle. So the right source vehicles, the yellow and white vehicles that are moving around town, and it carries 14 people.
And is that the plan, to buy another one like that?
Correct.
Second question, you have 2 loops.
We do.
In the city. How long is that altogether when you complete the whole thing?
I want to say the loops are about, if you do the whole thing, it's about 12 miles.
Okay.
Both loops.
So you would expect to do one loop in 30 minutes?
Right.
Okay.
Yep. Well, so if you look at our 130%, we're proposing another vehicle.
Gotcha.
So we would actually add another vehicle. So we would end up total with 3 vehicles.
And do you need that to get to the 30-minute
We do.
schedule?
We
You need the third
absolutely
vehicle?
do. We absolutely need another vehicle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Franny, did I see you?
Yeah, I hear that you say that you would offer service from 10 to 6 every half hour, every half hour. Is there any benefit to going to 9 a.m. since you're serving seniors with doctor's appointments?
Yeah.
and things?
Sorry if I misspoke. What I intended to say is that we would go to half-hour service from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry if I misspoke.
And then how many days?
I'm sorry, that's Monday through Friday.
Okay.
Sherry?
So again, this is one that I would be interested in seeing more information. So for instance, I'm not sure that I've ever seen a route, a little map sort of thing, and what you are supplying now would just be really beneficial.
Be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Go ahead, Amy.
Do the STIP funds, would they pay for vehicle maintenance or would that be coming from another?
No, so the vehicle maintenance is budgeted for in our discretionary and STF. So
Okay.
under our 5310 and STF.
And how long would you expect the buses to last, to be in service for?
So that's a good question. So the service is about 7 or 8 years for a vehicle. And actually with good preventive maintenance, we can get another 3 years out of it.
Bill Farrington?
Just one question. So, Cosette, you said that, I think you might have mentioned what the current ridership is, and then you're projecting some increase in ridership based upon the increased service availability?
Mm-hmm. So we're currently carrying about 7,000 trips per year. And over the 2 years that we would implement the service, we're estimating an additional 12,000 trips over those 2 years. And we're being conservative.
I think your rides are 12,000.
That's what we would, that's what the outcomes of
with the
this.
expansion?
Yes.
Other questions? Okay.
She's still got more
I have
projects.
one.
Oh, I'm sorry, you gotta jump right in there.
So just a real quick clarification, and this is an LTD
This is an LTD service, yes.
out
So-
of district?
It is out of district. So this came about probably 12 to 15 years ago where there was a provider that was operating in Florence. They owned the vehicle, they were doing the trips, they were getting funding, outside funding, state and federal funding, I believe. Basically, they disappeared. So some bad behavior, some bad business practices, they disappeared, no vehicle, no infrastructure, nothing left. So they approached LTD, and LTD got the vehicle. We made sure we had a turnkey operation, so regardless of who's actually operating the service, we can continue to have that service operate because it's critical for the folks who live in.
So funding, so because we don't collect taxes from
Right.
Florence, how is it?
Great question. So again, it's 5310 funds. So LTD puts no
What's a
general.
5310? I apologize.
No,
You
no,
keep
that's,
using it, I don't know what
that's fine, I'm
5310
so sorry. So 5310 funds are funds that we receive, they're federal funds, and they are distributed through the state, and they're intended to serve people, seniors and people with disabilities.
But it's, if I can qualify, but it's still public transportation, so you don't have to qualify to be in those two categories in order to, they just want you to
But they're
show
looking for
that you're
communities with a higher
serving.
percentage of those two communities, is that?
Yes, and
Yeah.
Florence fits that bill, so,
Absolutely.
yeah.
So again, besides just seeing the map, and it would be interesting to see the funding, you know, what have you had?
Sure.
Yeah.
Be happy to. And actually, I know, Phil, you mentioned earlier that you don't know very much about these programs, and this is a great opportunity for us to tell you about these.
Yeah, and I think it's clear from the questions that several of us are.
Yes, absolutely, so I appreciate that. I appreciate that. So I'm going to move on to project number 9. This is Diamond Express service expansion. So this is another service that operates outside of the LTD service area and that LTD oversees. This is intercity service between the city of Oak Ridge and the Eugene Springfield metro area. We have a few stops in the metro area, and then the service terminates at the Amtrak station. So it serves the Eugene station and then Amtrak station. So it gives people a good network opportunity, transportation network opportunity to connect to other providers. What we're proposing in the service expansion is to add a 4th trip between Eugene and Oak Ridge. Currently, we're operating 3 round trips Monday through Friday, and this would give us a midday trip. And I don't have to tell you all about Oak Ridge and kind of their past, their history, and really Oak Ridge is looking to the future. So again, economically very depressed, but pulling themselves up by the bootstraps. And this service is funded, it's been historically funded through 5311F, which is an intercity service that connects to a metro area and gives people an opportunity to connect to a wider network. That funding's been kind of revamped, so it's a transportation network funding, and it's also getting wrapped up in the out-of-area discretionary STIF program. So it's just kind of getting revamped a little bit, but, and in addition, Oak Ridge contributes to this service as well.
Did you say it was Monday through Friday, Monday through?
It's Monday through
7?
Friday.
It's Monday through Friday? So there's a lot of interest in bicycling in that area?
There is.
So recreational tripping at all, is that something in the consideration, or?
So looking on to Project 10.
Oh, I'm anticipating.
Segue. You're absolutely right. So Oak Ridge is really working hard to expand their economy through recreation. So they've been really asking for service on the weekends.
Okay.
So what LTD is proposing is that we do a pilot program. It would be 2 trips every Saturday. So a morning trip and a evening trip. And we would do this on year 3, which is 2021.
With the same bus or?
It'd be with the same vehicle. Do you want me to do my 130%? Okay. So for, that was our 100% of out of area. For the 130%, this is that third vehicle that we talked about for Rhodey Express. So I probably don't need to talk about that anymore, but this is what we need in order to expand service and have 30-minute service. And
Is there another potential source of funds if only 100% is funded?
so if it's not funded through this program, we would be applying for funds through STF, so, which is also becoming scarce perhaps.
Is that federal or state?
STF is state.
State.
David?
So I'm trying to understand the numbers on Project 9. You're going to add another, right now you have 3 round trips, you're going to add a fourth round trip, and it's going to cost $25,000 a year to do that. Is that $100? I mean, if I'm doing 52 weeks times 5 trips a day, that's 260 trips. Times 100, so it's $100 to run a round trip? Is that what does that make sense?
So,
It seems inexpensive to me.
no, this is just one trip, 5 days a week, and that's what we had conversations with Pacific Crest, who provides the service. We contract with the service, and this is what they told us it would cost.
Okay.
So I think
For
that's
one
what-
additional trip,
This is the marginal cost as
Yeah.
compared to what they're doing now.
correct.
Yeah.
So I think this is where we need more
I want to
information
know,
about.
yeah, that seems.
I'll get you some numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a demand for a fourth trip?
There is, and how I know that is we actually did do a fourth trip. So we used to contract with Special Mobility Services to provide our ride source paratransit and to coordinate all that within the metro area. We were also able to contract with them to provide the service for the Diamond Express. When we went out to bid for the ride source paratransit service, they were not selected. They were not the successful bidder. So we had a new contractor in there providing those services, and they did not want to continue to provide the Oak Ridge Diamond Express. We had been contracting with them, I believe, for about 15 years to provide that service. And again, that's another one of those funding sources that had remained flat. And with such long distance, the fuel costs and the labor costs were continuing to grow. So we were able to add the fourth trip, and that fourth trip was in there for about 3 years. And then when we selected a new contractor, they weren't able to deliver the service within the budget that we had, so we had to cut that fourth trip. So we already have operated that trip for about 3 years, and it's sorely missed.
Gotcha, thank you.
Other questions?
I do.
Go ahead, Ruth.
So in comparison to what is being proposed for the Florence to Eugene, which would be a point-to-point, the Diamond Express is unique in that it has some stops as it's coming into town. And what prompted that?
You mean between the Oak Ridge
Oak
Diamond
Ridge and-
Express? Yeah, and the Florence, or the Florence. Well, we're having conversations with LCOG about potentially sharing some stops on the way out to Veneta. So they're still looking at how that service would be kind of designed and programmed. So I mean, it could end at, say, Walmart and connect with MX, or it could come all the way in and maybe stop at certain locations along the way. So it's not out of the question, so.
Other questions? Phil Farrington, anything?
No, thank you.
Okay.
So the last, I promise, the last one, again, this is in our 130% request, and this just establishes a reserve fund for our out-of-area services. We've not had this in the past, and so we operate on a very slim margin for the services that we operate outside of the LTD service area, and we are committed to not using general funds, which are generated within the metro area for the services outside of the district. So this just establishes a reserve fund that if there were unforeseen expenses, we could cover that.
Phil?
I'm sure you've already seen the arithmetic error. What should it actually be?
Actually, that's.
106.7?
I don't have the.
Why is it 56.7?
Is it a total of 100 or is it a total of 106.7?
I think it's 106.7.
I think it is too.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was an odd number, so.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
We got that right in our spreadsheet, in this spreadsheet.
Ah, gotcha. Thank you, Richard.
It's wrong in mine.
Yeah.
This is the guy who's had a little experience with numbers and everything.
Just to add up.
So I want to thank you for your patience, and I will bring you back more information. So
Great.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, we are about out of time. Thank you so much, presenters. This has been very helpful. It's been very enlightening to see this along with the forms and the formatted document. So I guess a question I have is, I'm trying to think, is there a reason for us to meet on January 22nd? I'm not sure what might be different between now and then. I guess the one thing is, do you need further elaboration or explanation?
History.
I think it'd be great to get the information that we've been asking for, if they can get it to us by then.
Is that feasible, Ruth and Kosan? Yeah. Okay, so let's plan on meeting on keeping that January 22nd. We'll get the backfill additional information, and if there's any new information, we'll also consider that. AJ, did you want to weigh in on something? Okay.
Since you're meeting, you're fine.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think it would be also good because your budgets are off right now. So this is, you'll also need to discuss if you want to ask the public transportation service providers to change their budgets at all, especially for those out of districts. So you need to discuss that and give them time to go back and have conversations too, before you would make a final prioritization list, I think, on the 5th.
Because requests are over the dollars available.
Requests are over the dollars available, yes. So,
So we're looking
So
at 3:30
we
here.
will plan on 3:30 here, January 22nd. Is there anything else that anybody has before we adjourn? Last chance, going once? Oh, Amy, go right
Quick
ahead.
question, if it's worthwhile. Do you feel, from your perspective, Kate, that there was a good representation of, the out-of-district communities among the applicants that submitted requests? Or were there any communities that were missing that were not represented in the, from your perspective?
I don't. Crestwell is in district. So I think from out of district, we did reach out to all of the out of district cities, and we reached out to the county to make sure they knew about that. I went and talked to all of the city managers at their city manager meeting in November to make sure they all knew. So I think they did have an opportunity to submit. And I think really for most of those communities, if they're such small communities, that it would be hard to have a service. So I think that, yes.
Okay.
Sherry?
So my question has to do with getting the word out about what we're doing, what we're about. Are these meetings from this meeting going out to, for instance, City of Springfield, City of Eugene? How is the word getting out about what's happening here?
They are publicly available. I can send them out if you would like to send them out to anyone. I don't.
Well, I'm just, my thought is, always when we're dealing with tax money, it's, the public interest. Are we doing any kind of public releases about?
Do people know we're spending their money?
Well, yes, but I'm also concerned that they're aware that there's a process and that we're working through it and that we are, representing lots of different areas throughout Lane County. The money is coming from all of the employees in Lane County, and so I am just concerned that, and I don't know how that would happen, but yeah.
Can I talk to that? The Secretary of State Oregon did an ongoing audit of the federal grant process and contacted a number of constituencies and was very impressed with the level of knowledge that is up there. So they have generally statewide and pretty good outreach. That outreach has taken place over many months. So we're seeing the sort of pay outside. A lot of this.
Oh, Sherry, and we are going to Lean Act tomorrow, so we will discuss it at Lean Act and give them an update to let them know about it.
That takes care of the elected officials. I'm also concerned about the average Joe on the street.
Phil?
This is a public meeting, isn't it?
Yes, this is a public
And I
meeting.
assume that you comply with the public meeting notice requirements?
Yes.
What are those, what do you do to make a public notice for this meeting?
So we notice it in the paper, and these are recorded, and they are available on our website, so people can watch the whole movie of it.
So somebody who came in late could still see what we did today?
Oh, yeah, yeah, it's recorded, and you can stream it, and you can stream it live, or you can watch it at a later date. We don't have their electronic minutes, so we don't have a minutes taker that would be sending that out, but I think it's pretty available in terms of public meetings. And then I think Kate mentioned a little bit that we did do a lot of outreach for the application review. We talked to all the metro area partners, she did the city managers meeting, and then personally reached out to the smaller communities to make sure that they had an opportunity to apply. I think it's a capacity issue. A lot of those folks don't have staff on hand that will, attend a lot of the meetings.
Paul DeJessica.
Paul Thompson from Alcott, the Act. Just to clarify, the Act has about 30 members, about 2/3 are elected or appointed, and about 1/3 are citizens.
Okay.
So, and they have been hearing every month about this, and we'll get a full report tomorrow night.
Thank you. Anything else?
I just would chime in on what Sherry's suggesting is maybe we have a report out once we've gotten maybe narrowed down, or there's certain decision points where we let the public know that here's what's happened, here's who's impacted, here's who's championing their own communities, and some programs, services that they can look forward to, that lets them know that the STIF funds that they're seeing come out of their paycheck is actually working for them in a broader sense than just the metro area.
Almost a release kind of format, is that what you're thinking?
I'm not sure what would be the best mechanism, but I agree with Sherry that it's the person on the street that I would like them to know the value of what they're putting their funds into the pot and wonder what they're getting out of it.
Great.
Framing or marketing, that as I know we've done some press releases as plans have been accepted.
Basically, there was an announcement that the complete plans that were submitted on November 1st have been posted to the ODOT Rail and Public Transit Division website, particularly the test area program page. So we have not actually been doing a lot of ODOT-centric or statewide outreach around STAF other than that Secretary of State real-time audit, which was sort of watching what we did relative to how we were collaborating with bodies like this.
Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you. January 22nd, 3:30 here.